and CEO of Project Assistance, and Jim Colton, Practice Director of Portfolio and Project Management. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Gus Chikala founded Project Assistance in 1996 with the goal of transforming our clients' approach to portfolio and project management to achieve a standard of excellence and execution that consistently delivers expected project outcomes. A recognized portfolio and project management expert, Gus is a published author of many popular articles and books on the subject of project management, and he's frequently asked to present and teach topics of interest around project and portfolio management. Gus?
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. I'd like to start off today's presentation with a brief review of our agenda. First, we're going to put portfolio project management in context of the overall organization and why portfolio management is important. Next, we'll cover organization challenges that drive organizations to embrace portfolio management. We'll talk about the portfolio project management methodology. We'll talk about, specifically within the methodology, we'll talk about execution. For those of you who were here for our last webinar, this is, we did not advertise this as a part two, but in fact it is this, sort of the second half of portfolio management. In our last webinar, we covered how portfolios are established, how they're planned, and how projects are approved. And in this webinar, we'll cover an overview of how portfolios are executed and managed, and then we'll have a demonstration of how we can do that in the Microsoft Project Server technology. And then we'll talk about the methodology that's used to change organizations to go from whatever you're doing today to what we're going to talk about in terms of a more ideal environment around embracing portfolio management. So with that, when we talk about portfolio management in context, I always like to talk about this slide because the idea here is that why are portfolios created? Can we as portfolio and project managers describe why our portfolio is important? And what we like to be able to talk about is there's this thing called strategy, which I've heard summarized quite simply as a plan for change. And you say, well, why is the organization changing? And you can say, well, we can go back to the original mission of the organization and the values that then drove a vision for where the organization is going to go. So when we think about the vision, when we look at the horizon, when we look at that lighthouse beaconing to us to come towards it, that's what vision tends to be. And then strategy becomes the things that need to happen, that need to change in order for us to get from where we are today to where we're trying to get to. So when we look at plans for change, we hear things like increased revenue. We hear things like increased profit. We see things like increased market share, increased client base, produce new products. All those things at some level turn into initiatives that get identified or ideas to go into a portfolio. And then oftentimes we talk about this disconnect between the execution of the project management of those projects versus the strategy that comes out of the portfolio. So that disconnect, that tactical plan for how we, in fact, implement the ideas within a portfolio, we're going to refer to today as execution. Okay, so the company must plan a slate of projects to achieve the corporate mission. That's the bottom line. The projects are being done for a reason because they should connect the strategy, which should connect the vision, which should connect and support the mission of the organization. So that's the context we want to speak in today as we go through the rest of this presentation. So this is portfolio management. So we put the word project in front of it because portfolio management can mean a lot of different things, but we're talking in this case about a portfolio of projects. Okay, so let's talk for a minute just about the organizational challenges. The first one I want to point out is that increasing work volume requires better understanding and communication. Right? So if the organization is going to take on more work, how can we, in fact, get more work done? What's the methodology to enable that? Another challenge is that sometimes projects bypass project approval in the prioritization process. Sometimes they're called exceptions. Sometimes exceptions are the rule, meaning that an exception is supposed to be an exception, and our view is that portfolio onboarding process really shouldn't have exceptions. Okay, so that's a big challenge for organizations. How do you get this exception thing to stop happening? The other one is the prioritization process is viewed as an IT process. So we bring our ideas to IT and we just expect them to do everything, and the prioritization process is do everything sometimes. right? So sometimes IT is put into a position, even for non-IT components of initiatives, to go through an IT process for prioritization. Project steering committees have no real authority to fund projects, or sometimes to stop projects, or to give new money to projects, or to expand the project base. Resource constraints necessitate the shared resources, and that's in double quotes for a reason, are allocated to the highest priority projects. Right? So we have constraints, and we do the so-called sharing, which is the key people. Usually resource management problems come with a couple of people or a couple of specific roles, not everybody. So this is a big challenge, and this oftentimes we see this as we actually did a webinar on this a couple of years ago, and we talked about how resource management is the keystone between portfolio and project management. Oftentimes this is the driver for portfolio management, where we hear, well, if we can't get enough resources, what's the problem? Or if we're not delivering on our project commitments in the portfolio, what's the problem? Well, we're not starting things on time. Why aren't we starting things on time? Because we didn't have resources. Why didn't we have resources? Because the projects underway said they were going to be done. Why aren't they done? You know, it's always that whole line of questioning that comes into play here. And the other one, closely linked to two bullets above it, this thing about the steering committees and no real authority. There's not a process in place to stop projects that are off track. Right? So I'd love to ask organizations that have portfolio management, or say they have portfolio management, do you have a formal process for canceling projects that have gone awry? It doesn't mean that they have failed. It means that they may be indicating failed, off track. They have scope creep. They're forecasted to miss their schedule. Do we know they're forecasted to miss their schedule? Cost-benefit analysis, not validated. Okay, so we have, you know, a project gets conceived, or should be conceived, because it has a good business case, because it has good ROI, because it has good benefit, because it takes the organization to that vision through the strategy implementation that's going to, in fact, bring out new products or increase revenue or open up new geographies. So if we have assumptions in those cost-benefit analysis that aren't on firm ground, then we're shooting at a target that's pretty soft, and that's a big challenge for organizations. How do we strengthen and firm up the business cases that come to us, so that, or as we go through the project execution process that we're going to talk about today, how do we continually validate those business cases and make sure that the idea as it was originally conceived, in fact, is still valid? So at this time, as we start to talk about the execution of the portfolio, I'd like to turn this over to my colleague, Jim Colton. Jim?
Thanks, Gus. In my experience, I've found that organizations that have adopted a defined process with clear roles and responsibilities, they have a much greater probability of successfully implementing that process. In our last session, we focused on the first 3 steps of the PPM process. Today, we're going to focus on the final 2 steps, measure and respond, and analyze the portfolio benefits. The outcome of the first 3 steps was a well-defined portfolio of projects. Now we're going to talk today about executing that on an ongoing basis. In terms of measure and respond, the goal here is to maximize the business value of the project portfolio. It's important to adjust the portfolio mix based on changes to our business strategy and the actual performance of in-flight projects. So we have 3 sub-steps: adjust the portfolio, ensure the right portfolio mix, and conduct project governance activities. So the mix of the projects in the portfolio will be adjusted and should be adjusted on a periodic and ongoing basis. Poor performing projects should be eliminated from the portfolio if they don't meet the organizational goals financially. New projects will be selected and inserted into the portfolio based on new business opportunities and changes in business strategy. A best practice is to stack rank all the selected projects so that the organizational priority of all projects is clear. Projects will also be potentially put on hold or delayed based on resource or budget constraints. Gus alluded to earlier that some projects may run beyond budget, beyond schedule, which has a trickle-down impact from a resource perspective on projects that are kind of up next in the slate. So in conclusion, here we want to continue to review, realign, and reprioritize our portfolio. It's an ongoing, recurring process that's critical for executives. In terms of ensuring the right portfolio mix, I look at this similar to an analogy of our personal portfolio, where based on our age, our financial goals, maybe retirement objectives, and our current financial state, we may have a varied mix of investments. We could have a varied mix of stocks, bonds, real estate, cash, etc. Organizations should look at their project portfolio in the same way. So if organizations are in a high growth marketplace, a higher percentage of their portfolio of projects should be focused on revenue growth. Whereas if the market turns and weakens, they want to adjust their portfolio to include more projects around cost savings or potentially risk reduction. Another critical aspect of project portfolio management in the execution phase is the governance of active projects. If projects are challenged or failing, additional investments may be needed, resulting in a reduction of the proposed return on investment for that project. For challenged projects, the financial return should be reevaluated to ensure adequate ROI for the company. Some projects that are severely impacted in terms of cost or schedule may need to be canceled. It's important that the executive committee governing the portfolio has that authority. To minimize losses, projects should be evaluated and the entire portfolio on an ongoing basis. Some techniques in terms of governance are project reviews by a quality team, peer reviews or audits of the project from both a process and deliverable perspective, and as needed, management intervention where key stakeholders of the project will get together and formalize a plan to get the project back on track. We talked about earlier about the importance of the executive team being able to cancel projects that are challenged. Ideally, there's criteria that tells you at what point do we cut the cord and move on and kill the project, move on to the next best thing. We also want to analyze our portfolio benefits to make sure we're getting the best return on our investment in projects. One technique to do this is to conduct post-project validations of the business case that was presented when the project was originally approved. Typically, projects will establish a baseline based on revenue growth or cost savings as they present the project, and then compare the actual results of the project to that baseline to see if they met the original objectives. We also want to have a continuous process improvement mindset around the portfolio management process itself. A little more detail on the business case validations. Again, we want to establish the baseline. Sometimes it's difficult to measure return in terms of revenue increase if it's an existing product. So we may have to make assumptions around market growth and competitive situations when we establish that baseline. Obviously, for new products, it'll be easier to measure the revenue of a new product. Same thing with cost savings. Sometimes it's difficult, but when you establish that baseline, you can make some key assumptions and see if those assumptions play out when you do your assessment of that business case post-project. It's important to capture lessons learned from that CBA validation process and feed that back into the cost benefit and the proposal stage of the project lifecycle. So if we continue on an ongoing basis, we underestimate certain parts of a project, we want to feed those lessons back into future estimates for future projects. There's also other lessons learned that can be captured post-project that can get fed back into the project lifecycle. So lessons learned stage or step during project closedown is a much recommended step to take. In terms of continuous process improvement, no process can get better unless you measure it and continue to invest in it. And you can mature the process from a technological process or a perspective, from a people perspective, investing in education to improve the process, as well as the process itself in terms of streamlining it, making it more productive, those types of things. And Gus is going to talk a little bit more about governance in a few minutes after the demo. So I'll save some of that governance conversation for Gus.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, we're going to move to a demonstration in Microsoft Project Server. And I'm basically going to share some of the functionality that's available to support the delivery and execution of the project portfolio management process. One function is workflow. So across the top of my screen here, I think you can see a four-step, I'll call it a methodology, project methodology, with various checkpoints throughout the life cycle. Organizations can customize this process workflow and use it to manage the portfolio of projects. This project, you can see, is in the plans stage or phase, and then there's detail down below. So you can go in and see exactly where you are in the life cycle, what's being completed with the check marks here, and with the arrow tells you what stage you're in at this point in time. So this is valuable from a reporting perspective. You know, we can tell which projects are in which stage of your life cycle, and just get an overall perspective of the mix of projects at which stages they're in throughout that life cycle. It's important, again, to have a good mix in terms of not only the types of projects, but also what stages they're in. We don't want all our projects in the latter half of the life cycle and they're all going to finish at the same time, and then we've got all kinds of resource contention. So you want a good mix in terms of, you know, these things are staggered or in various stages of that life cycle. Next up, I'm going to show the capabilities in terms of resource management or capacity planning that Project Server has to offer. There's a variety of functionality in here. I'm just going to show you one that I find very valuable. So as we set up resources and assign them to projects or proposed projects, ideally we can assign them to a role. So each individual gets assigned to a position role, we're calling it here. And then that enables us to get a view not only of the individual and how much work they have on their plate, but also from a role perspective, are we over-allocated or under-allocated for that specific role? So for example, I can come into this resource assignment sheet and I'm going to select the analyst role. This shows me all the analysts that are in the organization. And then I can look at resource availability across that analyst role. So this is a nice graphic. It's called assignment work by resource. But you can see this black line indicates the total capacity for all the resources in that role. And the bars are the individual allocations of each individual. So in total, you can see for a month of October, you can see that we're over-allocated, or under-allocated, sorry. we're above the bar. So we have more work planned than we actually have the supply to deliver. So what does that mean? It's a nice, pretty picture, but what it means to me is I need to shift some of the work from late in this year, early next year, into, you know, kind of the second quarter. You can see this big blank area below the bar here. That shows me that I have more capacity moving into April, May of next year. So at a glance, I can quickly tell where I'm under allocated and over allocated by role. It's pretty powerful. Next up, I'm going to share, I'll go to what's called Project Center, which provides dashboard views of the project portfolio. And these are very easily configured. This one, this initial view is a summary view, and you can see it's grouped by owner. So I can quickly look at, in this case, all the projects that Amy Strand is the owner for, or, you know, other owners down here, Ben Spain. I can see all the projects that he's the owner for, and some key information about each one. What's nice is you can pre-configure these. I'm going to select Create and Select. Now I'm only looking at the projects that are in the first two phases, which is actually before they're approved by our executive committee for the project portfolio. So these things are in the initial proposal stages, or in the more what we call define here, where they're actually building out their business cases and their plans, or initial plans. So this view is grouped by the life cycle phase. Let's say I just want to see the projects that are in flight. I can look at another view called Plan and Manage, and I can see all the projects grouped by that life cycle phase once again. Here I have some nice indicators around project health, project quality, project resource indicator. Am I well-staffed, not well-staffed? Are we on track in terms of schedule, et cetera? So at a glance, as an executive, I can get a very nice view of all the projects in the portfolio. And then if I wanted to, you know, I could double-click over here on an individual project, and it would take me into the details. If I wanted to see the detailed project schedule or project documentation, I could do that. One other area I'd like to share, and then we'll do kind of a quick review of what we showed last webinar. But there's a business intelligence functionality built right into Project Server. It's kind of an extension to what already exists in the project views, but here you can get some nice graphics or tables. These are pre-built, but I'm showing you here a dashboard of project health by department. So how are the projects owned by finance faring in terms of cost, health, quality, resource schedule, et cetera? So I can look at it by department. Again, this is probably a very senior level executive view of what's happening in the organization from a project perspective. I can look at a summary dashboard, just trying to give you kind of a flavor for what's capable in the tool. So this one's kind of nice over here, the resource availability by role. This is a higher level view of what I showed you earlier. We looked at the detailed view, like just at the analyst level. Here you can look across all resources and see if I'm under or over allocated at any point in time. So I'm going to go back into Project Web App, and I apologize for those that were with us last time. This is going to be I'll call it a refresher for you, so it's not a waste of your time. But for the folks that are new, I wanted to kind of go through this quickly. I think you'll find this to be very valuable. There's functionality around the selection process. So in order to select the optimal portfolio, I start by identifying what's important to me in terms of what I need the projects to deliver. And I do that through the driver library. Again, these are quickly configured based on your business strategy and goals. So some examples here. I want to expand into new markets and segments, improve customer satisfaction, improve employee satisfaction, improve product quality, etc. These are basically going to be how the projects get scored, and then you'll see how that rolls into the stack ranking, if you will, of all the projects. Once I build the drivers, I can actually set up a scoring model. So you may want to have different scoring models depending on different entities in the organization. For example, the enterprise might have different criteria for scoring projects versus a division or a department within the company. So you can't have separate portfolios in the company. You can also apply different scoring models and ultimately different business drivers to each of those portfolios. Finally, I'll get kind of to the heart of it here. And what these are specific analyses of the portfolio at a point in time. So I'm going to select one. And essentially what I do is I can name the portfolio. I can select which scoring model I choose to use. So if this is the enterprise model, I might choose the executive consensus model that we built. I can actually select the projects which I'm going to include in the portfolio for analysis. So I typically will want to have all the in-flight projects as well as any new projects that are proposed to kick off in the near future. I can then look at constraints such as resources or cost. In this case, we'll look at total cost as a constraint that we're going to apply to the portfolio. And then I can choose a time horizon for that analysis. So in this case, we're going to look at a one-year time horizon based on the fiscal calendar year. So I've got the portfolio established. Now I can actually go through the scoring process for all those projects that I've selected to include in this analysis. So you can do this either in an executive meeting, or if you want to, optionally, you can do this during the life cycle of the project. So you could do it offline, and this can already be input prior to the executive committee getting together. So you can see how each project is scored based on each of those business drivers. There's a mathematical algorithm that then goes to work, and the outcome is this stack ranking. So the project production tracking dashboard is the top ranked project in this example. And I can scroll down, you can see every project. Basically, the percentages are the percent of the total business value that you're looking at for the organization. So this view tells you what percentage is applied to each project. So that's great. We know which projects are most important. We have a stack ranking here. Now I can go in and apply constraints. So I go into the analyze cost function, and I'm going to start with a baseline saying we have no constraints. We're going to approve all projects, which in real life probably is not real. It's not practical. So you can see that I'll scroll down. You can see all the projects are selected, and you can see the priority there. This view is customizable, so you could add fields or columns there that are applicable to both. Well, some fields could be applicable just to in-flight projects if you wanted to see total cost or actual cost, things of that nature. You can configure this view. So let's apply a constraint. Let's say we don't have the $19 million that this portfolio would cost us. We only have $15 million. So I can adjust the total budget, and I hit that recalculate button. So what it's going to do is, based on both the value of that project and the cost, it's going to reduce the portfolio of selected projects. So now you can see that 19 projects are selected instead of 23, and 4 projects got bumped out. The 4 you see down below that are unselected. So again, it's using an algorithm that's looking at both the business value and the cost of the project, and it's doing all the work for you. You know, very, very powerful feature of the tool. What's nice is you can run all different types of scenarios. Let's say, you know, a competitor is hitting us pretty hard in the Midwest, and now we want to reduce our project investment for this year. So we're going to drop it down to $12 million and change. Again, I can hit the recalc button, and you're going to now see that only 16 projects have been selected, and a total of 7 were pushed out. To conserve time, I ran a few of these scenarios earlier, but what I want to show you now is how you can compare the original baseline to these other scenarios based on what if. So in one view here, you can see how each scenario played out. And you can see the total cost for each scenario. You can see the total actual benefit. Those should be in dollars. And you can see here how much value, this is strategic value I've lost by reducing my portfolio. So that's an interesting way to look at it. We have this little graphic here is it's called the efficient frontier. And where you see this line start to flatten out indicates, kind of indicates where you may want to optimally invest. Because the return, you can see right about the $14 million mark, I'm getting 80-some% of my value, but I've been able to cut more than 1/3 of my cost. So where I start to see it flatten out may be the optimal investment in that portfolio. That's what I wanted to share today in terms of a demonstration. Appreciate your time, and now I'm going to pass it back to Gus.
Thank you, Jim. So for the last part of our discussion today, what we want to talk about is how do you get there? Right? What's the methodology we can use in an organization that's trying to improve its approach to portfolio and project management? So just a word on, well, why would you do it, right? So projects address and achieve strategic objectives. So and we ought to be able to see that. We ought to be able to manage it. We ought to know about it, and we ought to be able to adjust it if necessary. That's one of the benefits PPM brings to us, right? Portfolio project management. The new projects can be evaluated objectively against strategic objectives, business value, and whatever else is going on, right? So this thing becomes nimble if done well. It's not an annual process. It's something that can be done on an ongoing basis. Maximize benefits and return on project investments, right? So this, a lot of what Jim just talked about was this whole idea of continually reevaluating what's going on, and not only what's going on within the projects, but what's going on with the assumptions that were used to birth those projects, and to evaluate past projects, and to continually fine-tune and hone the tools that we have to ensure that ROI is there. Reducing risk, certainly, right? So I'm always I hate to say the word entertained, but I'm intrigued by an organization when I ask them, do you have a formal cancellation process, and they say no. Do you have bad projects going on now? Yeah. You're gonna let them finish? Yeah. What's going to happen? They're going to fail. So I mean, obviously projects fail, but what a portfolio project management process, its home can do is force bad projects to fail faster, right? So identify those issues and reduce the risk and get them off the docket. Increase throughput, not only of more projects, but of the right projects. And more clarity around priorities. I remember the first time we were faced with building a portfolio, and it was actually just a report that the executive wanted. And the executive said to me, I would be happy if we just had a list of the projects that are going on, right? So, and it sounds crazy, but I mean, clearly organizations sometimes exist in that kind of darkness that just saying let's prioritize projects can create that list and at least give us a sense of what's going on. And clearly, a lot of what we're talking about today is taking it much beyond that, right? So people understand what we should be working on, what the priorities are, where we should invest. Okay, here's just a quick little set of stats here from IDC, and if you see some of the circles there, what happens with project management maturity as we go from ad hoc to structured to standardized to optimized, and you can see some of the improvements here, going from 66% of projects aligned to company goals to 98%. Having failed projects go from 47% to 16%, and the ones that do fail hopefully fail sooner. Right? Projects over budget go from 35% to 13%. So there's some pretty striking improvements here that can justify the investment that it takes to get better at portfolio management. Right? It's not a free lunch. We're talking about increasing the rigor of the methodology of the organization. So how do you increase rigor is really the question. And the first thing is to have a vision. Right? A lot of initiatives come at us sort of at the execution stage. We want to get better and we're going to put in Project Server. We want to get better and we're going to build a methodology. But what we like to talk about is really this idea of what is a vision, and thinking about the activities that have to happen to create a vision to get us to a roadmap so that we have a solid and clear, really scoping of the requirements is the way I look at this. What are the requirements for an organization to get better at portfolio and project management, and how do we bring some order to the requirements, meaning it can't be we're going from nothing to everything, from level 1 to level 5 overnight. So how do we bring some order to that movement to greater rigor, to greater adoption, and ultimately to greater benefits? And so there's vision around what do the processes need to be, what are the technologies to support that, what's the vision for that, what's the scope of these technologies, what can they do, what are the people doing today, what's the current state, what's the future state, what's the gap. Same thing with governance. Does governance exist? Does governance need to exist? Do people understand that if we put in a project management methodology or a portfolio management methodology, that it has to be governed, right? That it's not the project managers necessarily responsible for getting good at delivering project benefits, but it's the people who hold the purse strings, it's the steering committees, it's those kinds of bodies. Okay, so the activities are, looking at the current state, looking at the future state, how wide is the gap between the current and the future, getting a vision of what it's going to take to close that gap, and then getting real tactical about what it takes. And oftentimes that means phasing, right? Phasing the process work, phasing the technology improvements, phasing the people movement towards something better, phasing the way the organization has to be realigned in order to enable this to happen the right way, and phasing in governance, right? So this really takes some thought, and that's what the vision step is about. And that comes out with assessments in the first stage, comes out with a vision in the second stage, and is worked with the organization to come out with a roadmap. Okay, from that we get to sort of the traditional implement, right? So when we look at the these activities, we go again from building process, building technology, or implementing and configuring technology, building people skills, building governance, and all those things are done the same way essentially. If you're trying to build something, we have to know the what, or the requirements. We have to know the how, or the development that's going to bring us there. We've got to create the tools. We've got to roll out the education. We've got to get it deployed. Or ultimately, we've got to get it supported, which really gets into, how are we going to build this implemented PPM solution and the governance procedures that then lead to this question of adoption. So we've seen where I'd say the second column here is the easiest. The first column is the next hardest, and the last one is the one that's sort of just assumed and therefore the hardest, because there really is a such thing as a change management methodology. There is a such way to say we're going to build in a plan for governance in our vision step. We're going to build in a plan to build governance processes, to build governance reports, to build people who support governance, to take the people who manage the project above the project managers to take responsibility for this thing, like the steering committees. Okay, so that what we end up with is, again, this focus on governing the process technology people, and ultimately going through the process improvement, the ongoing operations, the ongoing governance, the measurement and response, the things that Jim was talking about in execution today. That's governance, right? How we continually look at the right project mix, how we adjust the portfolio, how we cancel bad projects, how we look at the KPIs, how we have the reports, how we have the executive dashboards, and how we then swirl the mix, right? So what do we end up with? We end up with not just a solution, but an adopted solution, We have something that provides and delivers value. Okay, so just briefly, and I talked about most of this already, what's the ideal state? Right, so what's that vision going to look like? How do you plan for integrating the people, process, and technology? And how do you define the governance that will drive PPM best practices? Right, driving best practices, not the memo, what I call the memo from Bob, thou shalt follow the Microsoft project implementation training manual you received last week, but how do you really drive it? All right, so implementation, and we're talking today about the top strata here. So you see the dotted line around the top there. Obtaining executive support to spearhead the change, that's a big one. Right, that's part of governance. And this phased implementation approach based on the organization's ability to change. That's what the roadmap is. Right? It's a phased approach that says we don't do everything overnight. We can't go from no project plans to resource capacity versus demand management. We can't go from no project plans that are really resourced to time sheeting down to the task level on a weekly basis for every task, for every project manager, right? So how do we phase this thing in and ensure that the people impacted by the change understand the new solution and can embrace it and can drive it, right? So from an adoption standpoint, what's the ongoing mentoring, coaching, and education? Not the class we send people through and say, now do it or else, right? But what's that continuous improvement mindset? How do we go out and work with the people? How do we help people to get better through coaching and mentoring and providing a real path to continuous improvement, which, by the way, the vision is intended to address, right? If we're not doing a one-phase approach, then the continuous improvement, in fact, should be baked into a multi-phase improvement mindset, right? In the portfolio governance, the decisions, who makes them, how and when are they made? Okay, so if the bridge is out, do you have a plan in place to stop the train? That's what adoption is really about. Can we actually stop the train before it goes into the water? So the keys to successful adoption, executive buy-in, strong committee leaders, obviously on the committees, clarity of roles and responsibilities, building a firm foundation and evolve from there. Take time, right? The vision does take time. It's a valid step. It's a valuable step. And eliminate process exceptions, right? If everything's an exception, then nothing gets followed. So what did we just talk about as we come up on our 46th minute here? PPM drives your organization's vision by connecting strategy and execution. That was the first slide we had, right? Having a standard approach will help ensure realization of the benefits. Project Server provides tools that enable streamlining portfolio execution. And improvement comes through a clear vision, a proven implementation approach, and a commitment to adoption through governance. So talk about next steps for a minute here. In terms of who we are, well, we bring this idea of delivering better, faster, cheaper solutions, right? Cheaper results for projects is what it boils down to, right? So what it comes down to is, to embark on one of these initiatives, people are concerned about the risk of implementing portfolio project management systems and ROI. Is there ROI there? How do you do this in incremental steps? So it's not a 5-year mission, but we can do things in 6 months. So how do we speed that realization of value, and how do we effectively drive organizational change? So we've got practices. We have the vision and strategy offering. We have the EPM and SharePoint offering for the solution base, the technology base, the training to change the people, to get the companies in place, the customizations of the applications around these solutions, the staffing to leave the people behind to support the solutions, and then ultimately, and we'll talk about this in one of our future webinars coming up, this whole idea of Microsoft in the cloud. Right? So we are an online solution partner for Microsoft in the cloud. Our blog's out there, so if you want to see a lot of good content on this stuff, please visit our blog. And so it's designed to answer your questions from our readership. And as I mentioned, the cloud is going to be drastically different than Microsoft Solutions, and we're prepared to help you with the transition, including project. Okay. I have some contact information here. And by the way, for registering for upcoming webinars, there's an events link here, and there's also, by tomorrow probably, certainly by Thursday, a recording of today's webinar will be out on our events page. So that's our 45 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to Dan. If anybody wants to stay on, we can go a few extra minutes. We have an extra 15 minutes built in case people have questions and in case we have answers. Dan?
All right, thank you, Gus, and thank you very much, Jim. At this time, I'd like to invite you to use your webinar console to submit questions for us, as we covered earlier. And we already had a couple of questions come in. So first we had, how do you know a project is performing poorly while it is still executing?
How do you know a project is performing while it's still executing? Okay, so that's the that's this whole question about the measure and respond. Jim, do you want to take a shot at that, or would you prefer that I answer it?
I'll take a shot.
Okay, thank you.
So we want to establish how we're going to measure the success of a project. So we should do that up front. And the parameters could differ by project. So it could be that staying on budget is the most important KPI or key performance indicator for that project. So we want to keep a close eye on the budget. What's our actuals? What's our estimate to complete? And what's our estimate at completion versus the baseline that we set? It could be the schedule is more important. We have the dollars to invest in this project, but I got to have it delivered by April 30th. So keeping again a close eye on the schedule. What's on the critical path? Are we staying on track? Has my schedule date slipped on any key activities? That type of thing. So I think it's establishing up front how we're going to track the progress of a project, and then just keeping your eye on the ball through ongoing and periodic review project performance.
Right. The only thing I would add to that is, when we talk about execution, we're relying on the project managers themselves. There's this connection between sense and respond at the project level versus the KPIs going up to the top level, right? So during execution, we certainly, it happens that there's a portfolio system that has one set of data and a project system that has another set of data. Ideally, the answer is during execution, the project data actually feeds the portfolio data. Certainly, project servers intended to do that. Thanks for the question.
Okay.
Any others, Dan?
Yes, we have another. Will this technology be available on Project 2013?
Yes, it will. I mentioned Project in the Cloud. Project 2013 is just becoming available as part of the Office 2013 launch. And so you got Project Pro, Project Standard, Project Server sitting on the new SharePoint platform. Yes, it's out there. Yes, it's new. Lots coming on that. We've got our software set up. We've got our environment set up. We're getting our demo environments ready, so you should see something coming from us soon. Microsoft in the Cloud is here. Microsoft has a great hosted solution, not only for Project, but for Office, for Outlook, hosted email, for SharePoint, for storage, for operating system, infrastructure as a service, if you will. So lots of exciting stuff going on there. And so yes, it's available now. If you're thinking about moving, you might want to be steered in that direction. We could have a discussion about that. If anybody's interested, please let us know.
We did have one more question come in. How do I convince my executives to initiate a portfolio improvement program?
Convince executives. Oh, that's a good one. My experience has been executives aren't easily convinced. The ones that work the best start with an executive that wants to do this, right? So bottoms up. I always picture this. The Greek god that was trying to push a boulder up the hill, and every time it got to the top, it rolled back down again. He's sort of our team mascot. His name is Sisyphus, and it's this idea of pushing a rope uphill. So yes, it is difficult to convince executives. We've certainly helped organizations to put in pilots to provide that wow factor to the executives to show them that this can be done. It's a tough way to go. I've seen some shining examples of executives who have grown up around project and portfolio management and believe in it and think it's a good idea. And as a result of that, these things go well. It's not optional. We have to do this. We're going to rally the organization around it. And that's what we sort of recommend. It's sort of like the answer is almost like you should have picked better parents if you wanted to be rich. If you wanted to have a great portfolio and project management environment, maybe you should have picked better executives. I don't know. So good luck with that one. Any other questions?
That's all we have for now. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And I'd like to remind you that the webinar recording will be posted on our website, and we'll send slides out to any who request.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.